The day I stepped into the shelter, my chest felt like it was carrying a weight heavier than any physical burden. 2 years had passed since Rusty's passing, but the void he left behind still loomed large in every corner of my house and heart. I wasn't prepared to face another dog yet, let alone one as peculiar and unsettling as Reggie. When I arrived at Kennel 19, time seemed to freeze. The moment I laid eyes on him, an eerie chill ran down my spine. His wild tangle of fur hung off his bony frame like shadows clinging to forgotten memories. One cloudy eye stared blankly, while the other gleamed with an unnerving intensity that made me question whether he was sizing me up or silently pleading for something only he understood. As I stood there frozen, the staffer who'd been trailing behind suddenly stopped and said, "He won't bite." But her reassurance did little to ease the tension gripping my throat. What she didn't say spoke volumes: his silence, his refusal to engage, the fact that dozens before me had walked away without so much as a second glance. It wasn't just sadness emanating from this creature, it was mystery wrapped in despair. And then came the kicker: if no one adopted him soon, they'd put him down. The words hit me like a freight train. My pulse quickened. Could I really walk away knowing what awaited him? Or worse, could I take him home, only to realize I couldn't fix whatever haunted him? As I stood frozen in front of Kennel 19, the weight of my own silence pressed down on me. The staffer had wandered off with her mop, leaving me alone to face this strange creature who seemed more like a shadow than a dog. My eyes locked onto the brass tag dangling loosely from his neck, a relic worn smooth by time and neglect. Something inside me compelled me to lean closer, squinting through the dim light filtering into the shelter hallway. The words etched onto it hit me like an unexpected punch. "If you're reading this, I was loved once." The room spun slightly as those 7 simple words unleashed a torrent of memories I'd tried so hard to bury. Rusty the golden retriever, whose fur smelled faintly of pine after our hikes, whose tail wagged even at the sound of rain, he flooded back into my mind with vivid clarity. His absence still felt raw, like a wound that refused to heal. Could I really open myself up again? Let another dog step into the void he left behind? Love wasn't something I could just turn on or off. It came with risks, heartbreaks, losses too heavy to bear. Just then, the staffer returned with a clipboard in hand, hesitating when she saw how intently I stared at Reggie. "He's different," she said softly, almost apologetically. Her voice broke through my thoughts but didn't ease the ache building in my chest. Different didn't begin to cover what I saw before me, a broken soul wrapped in matted fur and sorrowful eyes. She glanced down at the floor before continuing. "We only kept him because of that tag. It's special. People don't usually leave messages like that unless they cared deeply." Then came the unspoken truth, delivered not with cruelty but with resignation. "If no one adopts him soon, though." Her sentence trailed off, unfinished, yet its meaning hung in the air between us like smoke thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Reggie sat motionless behind the chain-link door, watching me with that unnerving intensity. His cloudy eye reflected nothing, but the other gleamed faintly, catching the fluorescent lights above. For a moment, I wondered if he understood what fate awaited him, if he knew how close he was to being erased entirely. But there was no fear in his gaze, no desperation, just quiet acceptance, or maybe defiance. Either way, it unsettled me. This wasn't supposed to be about saving someone else. It was supposed to be about filling the hole Rusty left behind. Yet here I stood, staring at a dog who carried secrets heavier than any burden I'd ever known. The first few days with Reggie were anything but smooth. His silence wasn't just a trait. It felt like a wall, an impenetrable barrier between us that no amount of coaxing could breach. He didn't bark, didn't wag his tail, and barely acknowledge my presence. Each time I called his name, he'd tilt his head slightly, as if considering whether responding was worth the effort. It wasn't hostility, it was indifference, and it stung more than I cared to admit. Nights were the hardest. While I lay awake wondering if I'd made a mistake bringing him home, Reggie would curl up in Rusty's old bed without so much as a glance in my direction. The weight of failure pressed down on me. What if he never adjusts? What if I can't give him what he needs? These questions haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Then came the night that nearly broke me. I woke suddenly to the sound of the back door creaking open. At first I thought it was the wind, but when I checked, Reggie was gone. Panic surged through me like wildfire. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if he got hit by a car? What if someone mistook him for a stray? I grabbed a flashlight and tore through the house, calling his name into the darkness. The cold air bit at my skin as I stepped outside, scanning the empty street and shouting until my voice cracked. Hours passed, or maybe it only felt that way before desperation led me to the backyard. And there he was, sitting motionless beneath the maple tree, bathed in moonlight. For a moment, I wanted to scream at him, to unleash all the frustration and fear that had been building inside me. But something stopped me. His posture wasn't defiant or even disinterested. He sat with his head lowered, one paw resting gently on the frost-covered ground, his cloudy eye reflecting the pale light while the other gleamed faintly. There was something profoundly human about the way he looked, not sad, not angry, but contemplative, as though he carried secrets too heavy for words. I knelt beside him, my breath visible in the freezing air, and whispered, "You scared me, you know." He didn't move, but after a long pause, his tail thumped once against the earth, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, yet enough to make me feel seen. The address on the back of Reggie's tag led us to a quiet farmhouse at the edge of town. It wasn't run down, but it carried the weight of memory's faded paint on the porch railing. An old rocking chair that creaked slightly in the breeze. I parked the truck and stepped out, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. Reggie stayed inside, his cloudy eye reflecting the pale morning light as he watched me approach the door. When I knocked, the man who answered looked like someone who had lived through too many winters. His face was lined with age, his hands gripping a cane tightly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly yet polite. "I'm sorry to bother you," I began, hesitating for a moment. "I adopted a dog a while back. Found your address on his old tag." The man froze, his grip tightening on the cane. For a second, I thought he might close the door, but then something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition or maybe regret. "He's got one cloudy eye, shaggy coat. Answers to Reggie," I added cautiously. The man took a slow step forward. "You brought him?" Reggie was still sitting in the truck, watching us from behind the window. I opened the door wider, and he stepped out slowly, his movements deliberate but cautious. The man's eyes widened when he saw him. "Tucker," he whispered hoarsely, almost involuntarily. And that's when everything changed. Reggie stopped dead in his tracks. His ears perked up sharply and a low whine escaped his throat, not sad, not scared, but unmistakably filled with recognition. He walked toward the man, sniffing his shoes before leaning into his leg with a weight that seemed to carry years of unspoken sorrow. The man dropped his cane without warning, sinking to his knees. His hands trembled as they found Reggie's fur, clutching it like a lifeline. "He was my son's," the man choked out, tears streaming down his face. "My boy died 4 years ago. I couldn't take care of Tucker after that. I tried, but..." His voice broke, and he buried his face in Reggie's neck. It was surreal, watching this reunion unfold. Reggie didn't bark, didn't pull away, he simply stood there, grounding the man in the present while simultaneously dragging him back to the past. I felt like an intruder witnessing something so raw, so intimate, but there was no denying the depth of emotion between them. The name Tucker had unlocked something deep within Reggie, a floodgate of memories he'd clearly tried to bury. Watching him now, I wondered how much pain he'd carried all these years, how many nights he'd lain awake, remembering a life he could never return to. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the air at Maple Pine Senior Living carried the faint scent of lavender polish and old books. Reggie padded through the common room as usual, his steps slow but deliberate, his eyes scanning the faces of residents who had long since stopped expecting visitors. Most days he would settle beside George, a man in his late 70s who hadn't spoken a word in over 2 years. Today was no different. Reggie walked straight to George's chair by the window and leaned into him, his body warm against the man's legs. George rested a hand on Reggie's head without looking down, their silent ritual unchanged. But then something extraordinary happened. As I stood nearby, pretending to read a magazine while keeping an eye on Reggie, George cleared his throat. The sound was so unexpected that it froze me mid-page turn. He shifted slightly in his seat, his gaze still fixed out the window, and said softly, almost under his breath, "Thanks." Just one word, yet it ricocheted through the room like thunder. A nurse dropped her clipboard, and another resident gasped audibly. Even Reggie seemed to pause, tilting his head upward toward George, as if trying to understand what had just occurred. Nobody moved for several seconds until George gently patted Reggie's side again, signaling that the moment had passed. That single syllable became legend among the staff and residents, proof that even the most broken hearts could find words when given enough quiet space. Later that week, we visited the library for Caleb's reading session. This time, however, there was a new boy sitting cross-legged on the floor, a child named Aaron, maybe 8 or 9, clutching a book about dinosaurs with trembling hands. His mother explained quietly that Aaron suffered from severe anxiety and refused to read aloud, not even to family members. She hoped Reggie might help where others had failed. I guided Reggie to sit near Aaron, close enough to be noticed, but far enough to respect his boundaries. At first, Aaron ignored both of us entirely, flipping pages nervously. But Reggie didn't move. He simply stayed, his breathing steady, his presence unwavering. After 10 minutes of tense silence, Aaron whispered a single sentence, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but clear enough for Reggie. Then another. Slowly, haltingly, he began reading aloud. His voice wavered at first, barely audible, but grew stronger with each page. When he stumbled over a difficult word, Reggie let out a soft huff, as though encouraging him to keep going. Tears streamed down Aaron's mother's face as she watched her son transform before her eyes. By the end of the session, Aaron was speaking confidently, his fear momentarily forgotten. And Reggie? He sat motionless, tail flicking once as if saying, "You did it." It was a Tuesday morning, the kind where the air felt heavy with unspoken grief. Reggie and I had just finished our visit at Maple Pines when I noticed a woman sitting alone on one of the benches near the parking lot. Her hands were clasped tightly around a tissue, her shoulders trembling as though she'd been crying for hours. Something about her posture, defeated yet fiercely holding on, made me pause. "Do you mind if we sit here?" I asked softly, gesturing to the space beside her. She shook her head without looking up. Reggie didn't move toward her immediately. Instead, he sat a few feet away, his body angled slightly so she wouldn't feel crowded. For 10 minutes, there was silence, only the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional distant laugh from inside the building broke through. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she reached out a hand. Reggie leaned into it, his warmth seeping into her palm like an unspoken promise that everything would be okay, even if it wasn't right now. By the time we left, she had stopped crying. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. It began simply, "Thank you for bringing him." She explained how her husband had passed 6 months ago, leaving her adrift in a sea of loneliness. But that day, Reggie's quiet presence reminded her she wasn't entirely alone. That same month, another life-altering moment unfolded, one far more harrowing. We were visiting the high school library during a special after-school session designed for teens struggling with anxiety or depression. Reggie lay quietly beneath a table where several students gathered, their voices hushed but tinged with despair. One boy caught my attention not because he spoke, but because he didn't. He sat slumped against the wall, his hoodie pulled low over his face, clutching a notebook like it might save him from sinking further. His name was Liam, and according to the librarian, he hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. When the session ended, most of the kids dispersed, but Liam stayed rooted to his spot. Reggie walked over, nudged the boy's knee gently, and then settled down beside him. They stayed like that for nearly half an hour, Liam staring blankly ahead, while Reggie rested his chin on the boy's foot. No words were exchanged, but something shifted in the room. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my truck windshield wiper. It read, "I thought no one could understand what I'm going through, but your dog listened without judging. Thank you for saving me tonight." My chest tightened as I realized what might have happened if Reggie hadn't been there. It was one of those afternoons where the air felt heavy, like it carried the weight of unspoken stories. At the Veteran Center, Reggie and I had just finished our usual rounds. Hal greeted us warmly as always, his voice booming with gratitude for the doc as he'd taken to calling Reggie. But today, someone new caught my attention. A woman sat alone against the far wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes scanning the room but never settling on anything. Her name was Denise. Hal had mentioned her earlier, a former soldier struggling with PTSD who rarely spoke or made eye contact. Reggie noticed her too, but instead of walking straight up as he sometimes did, he paused near the doorway. His body language shifted slightly. He didn't cower, but there was a deliberate stillness about him, as if he were waiting for permission rather than demanding attention. For 20 minutes, he simply stayed where he was, sitting quietly without moving closer. The tension in the room grew palpable. Even Hal seemed unsure whether Reggie would make a move at all. Finally, Denise stood up. She hesitated for a moment, glancing around the room before slowly lowering herself onto the floor beside Reggie. Her movements were cautious, almost hesitant, as though she expected rejection. When she finally placed her hand on his back, something inside her broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks silently, yet powerfully, like years of pain were unraveling right there on the carpet. Reggie didn't flinch or turn away. Instead, he leaned into her touch ever so slightly, offering not comfort exactly, but presence, a quiet acknowledgement that she wasn't alone. The rest of the room faded into background noise. All I could focus on was this fragile connection forming between them. Denise cried softly, her shoulders shaking, while Reggie sat motionless, bearing witness to whatever storm raged within her. It wasn't dramatic or loud, it didn't need to be. In that moment, I realized what made Reggie so extraordinary. He didn't try to fix anyone. He simply existed, steady and unyielding, giving people the space they needed to heal themselves. When we left later that day, Hal pulled me aside. "You see what he did?" he asked, his voice low but filled with awe. He waited. "That's rare these days." I nodded, unable to find words to describe how profoundly simple and profound that act truly was. It started on a Thursday morning, one of those days where the air felt heavier than usual, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Reggie didn't come to the kitchen when I poured his soft shoes onto the plate, a ritual we'd perfected over months. He stayed by the hallway window instead, lying in that quiet, statuesque way he always did, but something about him felt off. His breathing was slower, his movements non-existent. At first, I thought maybe it was just an old dog's laziness catching up with him. But when he refused even the scrambled eggs I made a treat, he never turned down. I felt panic rise like bile in my throat. "Reggie," I said, kneeling beside him, placing a hand on his side. His ribs moved steadily under my palm, but there was no wag, no acknowledgement, not even the flicker of an ear. For a moment, I wondered if I'd missed something, some hidden injury, some illness only he could feel. My mind raced through every worst-case scenario: tumors, infections, heart failure. The tag around his neck suddenly felt heavier, like a cruel reminder of how fragile the second chance truly was. I called the vet immediately and drove us there within the hour. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and damp fur, a scent that usually calmed me because it meant help was near. Today, though, it only amplified my unease. Reggie sat quietly in the corner, not trembling or whining like other dogs might have. Just still, watching. When Dr. Penfield finally examined him, her hands gentle but firm, I stood frozen in the doorway, bracing for bad news. "He's fine," she said after what felt like an eternity, her voice steady but kind. "No fever, no pain points, nothing physically wrong." Her words should have been relief, but they only deepened the knot in my stomach. If he wasn't sick, then why? Why would he stop eating, stop responding, stop being Reggie? Back home, I watched him closely. He didn't return to his bed or follow me around like he used to. Instead, he settled beneath the maple tree in the yard, where golden leaves now carpeted the ground. I brought him blankets, water, anything to coax him inside, but he remained rooted there, staring at the horizon. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time blurred. And then, late one evening, as the wind whispered through the branches above, I realized Reggie wasn't giving up. He was reflecting. Whatever weight rested on his soul, whatever memories lingered from Tucker's life or Reggie's own journey, he needed this time to process it. By Sunday, he began to eat again, small bites at first, then more confidently. He looked at me as if to say, "I'm still here." The mornings had grown quieter, heavier, as if the house itself knew something I didn't. Reggie's steps had slowed to a shuffle, his once steady tail now resting more than wagging. But even in his frailty, he remained a constant always by my side, always watching with that same quiet curiosity that had drawn me to him on the day we met. That last morning, though, everything felt different. The air was colder, sharper, like it carried whispers of endings too profound for words. I woke before sunrise, startled not by noise, but by its absence. The faint rustle of leaves outside my window usually accompanied Reggie's soft snores, but today there was only silence. My heart clenched as I turned toward the foot of the bed where he'd taken to sleeping again these past few days. He lay motionless, his breathing shallow and deliberate, each exhale a fragile echo of life. "Reggie," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of unspoken fears. His cloudy eye flickered open, followed by the other, bright yet dimming. He didn't lift his head, but his gaze found mine, a connection so deep it felt like falling into an ocean of memories we'd built together. I slid out of bed, my movements slow, afraid any sudden action might shatter the moment. Sitting cross-legged beside him, I pulled him gently into my arms. His body was lighter than I remembered, his fur coarse with age but still warm against my chest. For hours or maybe just minutes, we stayed like that, the world outside fading into irrelevance. The first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, painting golden streaks across the floor. It was dawn, and somehow it felt right that this would be his final sunrise. A breeze drifted through the cracked window, carrying with it the scent of earth and fallen leaves. A single leaf detached from the maple tree in the yard, spiraling downward until it landed silently on the ground. The room seemed to hold its breath, every sound muted, as if nature itself understood the gravity of what was happening. Reggie let out one last breath, long and steady, before his body relaxed completely in my arms. There were no dramatic gestures, no parting words, just stillness, profound and absolute. Tears blurred my vision as I clung to him, unwilling to let go. The wind picked up slightly, brushing against the curtains like a gentle farewell. In that moment, I realized Reggie hadn't just been a dog. He was a keeper of stories, a listener who taught me how to truly hear others. And now, as the morning light bathed us both, I felt neither anger nor despair, only gratitude for the time we'd shared. The days after Reggie's passing felt like walking through a fog, each step heavy, each breath shallow. I kept expecting to hear the soft click of his nails on the porch, or see his silhouette by the window, but there was only silence. Yet, as the weeks unfolded, something unexpected began to happen. Letters started arriving, first one, then dozens. Each envelope carried a story, a memory, a piece of Reggie that lived on in someone else's heart. One morning, I opened a letter from Denise, the veteran who had once sat silently at the center until Reggie leaned into her hand. She wrote about how she had enrolled in therapy training programs because of him. "He didn't just heal me," she said. "He showed me what it means to listen without judgment." Her words hit me like a tidal wave, forcing me to confront the depth of his impact. Then came another letter, a child's handwriting scrawled across bright construction paper. It was Caleb, the boy from the library who had read aloud to Reggie every week. Inside the envelope was a drawing, a lopsided dog with oversized ears and a crooked tail, unmistakably meant to be Reggie. Beneath it, written in bold crayon letters, were the words, "Thank you for bringing this special dog to us." Tears blurred my vision as I traced the edges of the drawing. How could something so simple feel so profound? But it wasn't just letters and drawings. At Maple Pines, George handed me a small wooden carving of a dog when I visited next. "Made it myself," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. His hands trembled slightly as he placed it in mine. "Reggie," he reminded me what it feels like to care again. The weight of those words lingered long after I left. One afternoon, while sorting through the growing pile of tributes, I received an email from Donna, the woman who ran the grief support group. She attached a photo of Reggie lying beneath the oak tree during their last session. In the background, a young woman sat cross-legged beside him, her face buried in her hands. "That day changed her," Donna wrote. She told everyone she finally felt safe enough to cry. Each message added layers to the legacy Reggie left behind, a tapestry woven with quiet moments and small acts of courage. These weren't just stories. They were lifelines thrown to people drowning in isolation, despair, or fear. And now, even though he was gone, his presence still rippled outward, touching lives I would never meet. The house felt emptier without Reggie's steady presence, but the echoes of his life lingered in every corner. His worn blue vest still hung on the hook by the door, a silent testament to the countless lives he had touched. Each item on the Reggie wall, the paintings, notes, and Polaroids, seemed to hum with memories, as if they were alive with his quiet spirit. One evening, I sat at my desk with a fresh journal, its blank pages waiting like an open invitation. My pen hovered for a moment before I wrote, "Reggie didn't just change lives. He connected them." And in doing so, he reminded us that the quietest presence can be the loudest kind of love. Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal, its weight heavier than any book I'd ever held. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the maple tree where Reggie used to sit. The leaves whispered softly, their sound almost deliberate, as though carrying a message from somewhere far yet near. I stepped onto the porch, the chill biting at my skin, and looked toward the backyard. Beneath the tree, the small stone marker gleamed faintly under the moonlight, the brass tag resting against it like a heartbeat frozen in time. For a moment, I swore I heard it, the soft click of paws on wood, the familiar shuffle of movement. But when I turned, there was nothing, only the wind weaving through the yard, brushing past me like an old friend saying goodbye. It wasn't sadness that filled me then, but gratitude, a deep, overwhelming sense of peace, knowing that Reggie's legacy would live on, not just in the stories people told or the tears they shed, but in the way they carried his lessons forward. He had taught us all how to listen, how to stay steady, and how to let silence speak louder than words. As the breeze settled, I smiled faintly, certain that somewhere, somehow, Reggie was still watching over us.